because now Gavin is mad that they nationalized the California Guard. Trump has that ability, and people said, no president, they have to request it. No, they don't. You think that JFK said to George Wallace when he nationalized the Alabama National Guard, said, would you please let us nationalize your guard so you can be removed from stopping African-American people going to the University of Alabama?
Okay, everybody, fasten your seatbelts because of what happened on Fox. News was a political confrontation rather than merely a debate. When Davis Hanson, the winner, faced Jessica Tarlov on the subject of Donald Trump's use of federal powers, he arrived prepared with historical allusions, reason, and a no-nonsense demeanor. However, what began as a policy debate swiftly devolved into an ideological conflict. Jessica Tarlov attempted to portray Trump's immigration enforcement and law and order strategy as authoritarian overreach by relying on public opinion polls and emotive rhetoric. But Hanson came out swinging, calm, focused, and unflinching. He dismantled her argument piece by piece, calling out the left's tendency to glamorize street chaos and redefining it as democracy in action. Hanson argues that when the streets become lawless and city leaders do nothing, the National Guard's intervention isn't tyranny. Rather, it's responsibility that alone changed the tone of the discussion from political theater to a genuine discussion about national integrity.
In that interview said the downward spiral started in LA when the military arrived. Is that when it happened, or was it when protesters were hurling rocks at cops?
This is very small and isolated, and Donald Trump is doing what Donald Trump does best, and he's playing the same footage. He has that image, right, of that topless protester with the Mexican flag on top of a burning Waymo car, and it's terrible, and that guy should be prosecuted. You should not be able to do that. But that doesn't mean that in general, that's what's going on here. So Gavin Newsom is speaking for a majority of Americans. Right before we came on air, there was a new Quinnipiac poll that was released. So Donald Trump, -12 on approval in general, -11 on immigration, and -16 on deportations. He has taken his best issue and decimated it. And now Americans and illegals, who, yes, they're here illegally, are living in fear of what the government is trying to do.
There's millions of dollars in damage. A lot of businesses got ransacked. And illegals should be a little scared. They broke into the country. A lot of them have committed crimes. I'd like them to be a little fearful, Jessica. Gavin Newsom's emasculated. Trump reached into his state, took his guard, and used it to protect the people that Gavin either couldn't or wouldn't do. Attacking democracy is not enforcing the law. All they're doing here is enforcing the law. And they can't even get their story straight. All right, first there was no riot, then there was a riot, then it was peaceful, then it was mostly peaceful, then Trump provoked the violence. So the National Guard provoked the riots? Because I didn't see a single National Guardsman melt down a Waymo or loot a store, not one. You can't be held hostage in your own country by foreigners, because that's what this is. It's an extortion attempt. Every time you try to enforce the law, we're going to burn stuff. That's not how it works. Gavin thinks it's good politics to let your own city burn down. That's good politics?
This is a full-fledged ideological standoff rather than simply your average cable news argument. On one side, you have Victor Davis. Hanson quietly loaded intellectual ammunition and fired off facts like he'd been waiting for this moment his entire career, the crux of the debate, while Jessica Tarlov waved the red flag of authoritarianism. Tarlov came out swinging, accusing Trump of using the National Guard and other tools of state power like a dictator in waiting. She framed it as dangerous, extreme, and a threat to democracy itself. But Hanson was surgical. He wasn't just denying her point. He was turning the entire story on its head. He claimed that what we're seeing isn't authoritarianism, but rather a desperate attempt to restore order in cities overrun by chaos, indecision, and political cowardice. He claimed that when you let mobs control the streets, destroy property, and attack police officers while waving foreign flags, then cry oppression when someone finally steps in to stop it, that's not democracy, that's dysfunction. He reminded the audience of JFK intervening during the George Wallace standoff in Alabama. Strong federal action can occasionally be the only thing separating complete collapse from order, not an indication of tyranny. Tarlov attempted to rely on polls that suggested Trump's immigration policies were unpopular, but Hanson wasn't impressed. He pointed out that the polls are frequently weighted and oversample certain demographics to create a desired narrative. In his opinion, Polling has evolved from measurement to manipulation, and then came the knockout moment when Hanson highlighted the wider ramifications of this kind of soft-on chaotic thinking. When you minimize street violence, justify property destruction, and blame anyone attempting to bring about peace, you're not defending democracy, you're destroying it from the inside out.
But here's what's interesting. The mayor, Karen Bass, came down in her public comments on the side of the protesters who were protesting the idea of deportation at all, kind of like Kamala Harris used to march against deportation. And Gavin Newsom then gave a series of editorializations that I think have ruined his chances ever to be a serious national candidate. He said this was chaotic, this was reckless, and he said that they were just trying to have an arbitrary deportation quota. Gavin, 12 million people came into the country illegally. That was 3 million a year. That was 250,000 per month. That was over 8,000 a day. They have not been able to deport more than 1,000 on most days, sometimes 500. They would have to deport 8,000 people every single day for 4 years to get back where we were with 20 million illegal aliens when Joe Biden entered office. So it's not a quota, it's an effort to stop an invasion. What I'm getting at is, on one side of these violent acts, you have these protesters. And I'll just give a word of advice. You're going to lose the optics, Democrats, left, and immigration protesters if you have a lot of people here illegally and they're waving the American, not the American flag, but the Mexican flag as they're committing acts of violence. Think of the logic. I am waving the flag of the country under no circumstances I want to return, but I am attacking the officers and the infrastructure of the country that under every circumstance I want to stay in. That might explain why in the midst of all of this negative publicity, a CBS poll taken to show that people were outraged showed that just the opposite. 54% of the American people are for.
Let's now discuss the data and the narrative that they chose not to share with you when Jessica Tarlov used selective polling to depict America's opposition to Trump's border crackdown. The majority of Americans, not just Republicans or so-called Trump supporters, support continued deportations, according to a CBS poll cited by Victor Davis Hanson. This is because a broad cross-demographic majority of the population supports strong borders and consequences for illegal entry because they see what's happening. They see images of border crossings going out of control, and they watch as cities like New York and Chicago struggle to accommodate tens of thousands of people. For many Americans, the narrative that this is merely a humanitarian crisis is not convincing to the thousands of undocumented migrants who witness the tense hospitals, overburdened schools, and housing shortages. It appears and feels as though their communities are being sacrificed on the altar of political correctness. Hanson also made it very apparent that this is about the truth, not Trump, and that he wasn't only protecting a previous, he was criticizing the way that facts are misrepresented. Surveys are selectively used, and narratives are influenced by the person narrating the tale rather than by what is actually happening. He vigorously opposed the notion that enforcing immigration rules or mobilizing the National Guard constitutes tyranny. In Hanson's opinion, what is actually problematic is a notion that defending your nation is now. He wasn't just criticizing Jessica Tarlov, he was criticizing the entire framework of contemporary progressive spin, and in doing so, he revealed something much larger, the widening gap between what the media claims people believe and what people actually believe. Tarlov attempted to frame all of this as part of an authoritarian slide, but Hanson pointed to the real overreach: governments refusing to act, refusing to protect citizens, and then attacking those who dare to step in.